Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. I'm your host, Larry Schweikart, co-author of Patriots History of the United States with Michael Allen. Book's now in its 40th printing. I am using the 15th anniversary edition for our readings. You don't have to have that, but the page numbers will be off. The headers usually will not be. But for the last 5 or 6 episodes, I have been reading from the Documents book, which is Patriots History Reader. Again, if you're using the curriculum of the course, get the reader. It's just a whole lot easier than having to download all those documents yourself, but you don't have to have it. It's just helpful. And so we are going to look at today Observations on the New Constitution, Mercy Otis Warren, 1788. And this was originally written anonymously by Mercy Otis Warren in Boston, 1788, under the title Observations on the New Constitution and the Federal and State Constitutions, credited on the title page to the pen of a Columbian patriot. For a number of years, it was attributed to Elbridge Gerry, a Massachusetts Democrat Republican who had refused to sign the Constitution because it did not contain a Bill of Rights. Mercy, the sister of James Otis, an early patriot who wrote The Rights of the British Colonies Asserted and Proved, and openly opposed Parliament's power in the colonies, was entirely self-educated and became arguably the foremost female patriot and writer, respected during her lifetime by many of the most important men in the United States. Before the Revolution, she published a number of plays in which her characters thinly disguised treatments of various royal officials, and she unabashedly fomented rebellion for the cause of independence. During the Revolution, Warren recorded its history and later in 1805 published a 3-volume work, History of the Rise, Progress, and Termination of the American Revolution. Mercy Warren was later supplanted by Abigail Adams as the First Lady of the Revolution, but Warren clearly possesses the better claim. Frustrated with the restrictions placed upon her due to her sex, she saw the American Revolution as an opportunity to achieve genuine equality among individuals through the philosophy of respecting the God-given rights of all individuals as embodied in the Declaration of Independence. Warren became increasingly radicalized throughout her life and opposed the establishment of a strong central government, which she equated with the establishment of tyranny. She joined like-minded individuals in opposing the ratification of the Constitution and published her observations as a counterpoint to the Federalist essays being produced by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. Corresponding regularly with many of the famous founders, she nevertheless generally failed to move them with her arguments. In her pamphlet opposing the ratification of the Constitution, Warren demonstrated her ability to apply logical analysis to politics, providing an excellent example of anti-federalist writing. Now remember, the anti-federalists got kind of shafted on the name change. They used to be called the Federalists till the Nationalists took over their name. Remember that? The Constitution as submitted for ratification contained no Bill of Rights, a defect Warren found inexcusable and reason enough by itself to deny ratification. She was as concerned about the process of creating the Constitution as she was about the product. She did not believe Madison, Hamilton, or Jay when they soft-pedaled fears about the potential growth of government, or about Congress being able to determine its own pay, or about the concentration of power at the national level. She warned of the problems a big government threatened to create and proved prescient in warning that many threats posed by the Constitution would ultimately affect individuals. Warren also realized that an apathetic citizenry could pose a similar danger. So, from observations on the new Constitution and on the federal and state conventions. Mankind may amuse themselves with theoretical systems of liberty and trace its social and moral effects on sciences, virtue, industry, and every improvement of which the human mind is capable, but we can only discern its true value by the practical and wretched effects of slavery, and the southern states are languishingly in hopeless poverty, and when asked what is to become of the flower of their crop and the rich produce of their farms, they may answer in the more literal language of truth, the exigencies of government require that the collectors of the revenue should transmit it to the federal city. Now, we're going to see that wealth is wealth, and depending on how you determine wealth, the South was very wealthy. It was wealthy in land, it was wealthy in crops, it was wealthy in slaves. It wasn't wealthy in manufacturing. Animated with the firmest zeal for the interests of the country, the peace and union of the American states, and the freedom and happiness of a people who have made the most costly sacrifices in the cause of liberty, who braved the power of Britain, weathered the convulsions of war, and waded through the blood of friends and foes to establish their independence and to support the freedom of the human mind, I cannot silently witness the degradation without calling on them before they are compelled to blush at their own servitude and to turn back their languid eyes on lost liberties. And when patriotism is discountenanced and public virtue becomes the ridicule of the sycophant, when every man of liberality, firmness, and penetration who cannot lick the hand stretched out to oppress is deemed an enemy to the state, then it is the gulf of despotism set open, and the grades to slavery, though rapid, are scarce perceptible. Then genius drags heavily from its iron chain. Science is neglected. Real merit flies to the shades for security from reproach. The mind becomes innervated. That means numbed or slowed down. Innervated means almost the opposite of what you think it means. And the national character sinks into a kind of apathy with the only energy sufficient to curse the breast that gave it milk. Self-defense is a primary law of nature which no subsequent law of society can abolish. This primeval principle, the immediate gift of the Creator, obliges everyone to remonstrate against the strides of ambition and a wanton lust of domination, and to resist the first approaches of tyranny, which at this day threaten to sweep away the rights for which the brave sons of America have fought with a heroism scarcely paralleled even in ancient republics. On these shores, freedom was planted, her standard dipped in the purple tide that flowed from the veins of her martyred heroes. And here, every uncorrupted American yet hopes to see it supported by the vigor, the justice, the wisdom, the unanimity of the people, in spite of the deep-laid plots, the secret intrigues, or the bold effrontery of those interested in avaricious adventures for place, who, intoxicated with the ideas of distinction and preferment, have prostrated every worthy principle beneath the shrine of ambition. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't agree with her that that is the motivating factor behind Madison or Hamilton or any of the rest. They weren't, as best I can tell, motivated by avarice or greed or anything like that. They genuinely thought they were doing the very best they could to promote liberty and at the same time order. And you do have to have a balance of the two. Yet these are the men who tell us republicanism has dwindled into theory, that we are incapable of enjoying our liberties, and that we must have a master, but the revolutions in principle which time produces among mankind frequently exhibits the most mortifying instances of human weakness, and this alone can account for the extraordinary appearance of a few names, once distinguished in the honorable walks of patriotism, but now found in the list of Massachusetts' assent to the ratification of the Constitution, which, by the undefined meaning of some parts and the ambiguities of expression of others, is dangerously adapted to the purposes of an immediate aristocratic tyranny. All writers on government agree, and the feelings of the human mind witness the truth of these political axioms. Notice how she really, in many ways, is kind of restating Jefferson. Now, everybody agrees. People all understand. Everybody knows this, and so she's kind of redoing the Declaration of Independence in a few ways. That government is instituted for the protection, safety, and happiness of the people, not for profit, honor, or private interest of any man, family, or class of men. That the origin of all power is in the people, and they have an incontestable right to check the creatures of their own creation, vested with certain powers to guard the life, liberty, and property of the community. And if certain selected bodies of men deputed on these principles determine contrary to the wishes and expectations of their constituents, the people have an undoubted right to reject their decisions, to call for revision of their conduct, to depute others. Depute. I've not heard that word before. To depute others in their room, or if they think proper, to demand further time for deliberations on matters of the greatest moment, is therefore an unwarrantable stretch of authority or influence if any methods are taken to preclude this peaceful and reasonable mode of inquiry and decision. All right. 1. When society is thus deputed a certain number of their equals to take care of their personal rights and the interests of the whole community, it must be considered that the responsibility is the great responsibility. Man is not immediately corrupted, but power without limitation or amenability may endanger the brightest virtue, whereas frequent return to the bar of their constituents is the strongest check against corruptions to which men are liable, either from the intrigues of others or more subtle genius or the propensities of their own hearts. And the gentlemen who have so warmly advocated in the late convention of the Massachusetts the change from annual to biennial elections may have been in the same predicament. But it is necessary to dwell long on this article, as the best political writers have supported the principles of annual elections with a precision that cannot be confuted, although they may be darkened by the sophistical arguments that have been thrown out with design to undermine all the barriers of freedom. So first, you need to have regular elections with people who are subject to meeting with their constituents on a regular basis, okay? In other words, the legislators need to return home and meet with their constituents. More recently, the way legislators and others, take, for example, my own governor here in Arizona, who won't talk to anybody, the way they've gotten around this is that they have set up town hall meetings that are closely screened so that anybody not in the club, anybody not on their side, really doesn't get in. And you see this with the current president, for example, who won't ever take any kind of meeting or any kind of press conference where he has to actually answer a hostile question or a question that he might not have the answer to. So what Warren is asking for here is openness, that you have to face the music. You have to go back and talk to your critics. I'm not sure in many cases that would help, but it's better than nothing. But we don't have that really now. Number 2, there is no security in the proffered system, either for the rights of conscience or the liberty of the press. Despotism, usually while it is gaining ground, will suffer men to think, say, or write what they please. But once established, it is thought necessary to serve the purposes of arbitrary power. The most unjust restrictions may take place in the first instance, and an imprimatur on the press in the next may silence the complaints and forbid the most decent remonstrations of an injured and oppressed people. Can you say China virus? That's the first thing they did on social media. They stopped all discussion, all reference to the vax, to side effects, to alternative medicines like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. Just shut that off. Man, this is exactly what she's talking about there. When you can do that, you're very near a tyranny. 3, by the way, that's all put back in the First Amendment. There are no well-defined limits of the judiciary powers. They seem to be left to a boundless ocean that has broken over the chart of the supreme lawgiver. Thus far shalt thou go and no further. and they cannot be comprehended by the clearest capacity or the most sagacious mind, it would be a Herculean labor to attempt to describe the dangers with which they are replete. So she says the judiciary as it now stands needs some limits, which of course are put in with the Fifth Amendment and many others. 4, the executive and legislative are so dangerously blended as to give just cause of alarm, and everything relative thereto is couched in such ambiguous terms and such vague and indefinite expression as is sufficient ground without any objection for reprobation of a system that the authors dare not hazard to a clear investigation. So she's saying there's too much blurring of the lines of authority between the president and the Senate and the House. 5, the abolition trial by jury in civil causes, and this was fixed in the Bill of Rights. This mode of trial, the learned Judge Blackstone observed, has been coeval with the first rudiments of civil government, that property, liberty, and life depend on maintaining in its legal force the constitutional trial by jury. He bids his readers pause, and with Sir Matthew Hale observes how admirably this mode is adapted to the investigation of truth beyond any other the world can produce. 6, though it has been said by Mr. Wilson and many others that a standing army is necessary for the dignity and safety of America, yet freedom revolts at the idea when the divan or the despot may draw out his dragoons to suppress the murmurs of a few who may yet cherish those sublime principles which call forth the exertions and lead to the best improvements of the human mind. By the edicts of an authority vested in sovereign power by the proposed Constitution, the militia of the country, the bulwark of defense, and the security of national liberty, if no longer under the control of civil authority, but at the rescript of the monarch of the aristocracy, they may be sent into foreign countries for the fulfillment of treaties stipulated by presidents and 2/3 of the Senate. So here, this is interesting. She is warning against not only a standing military that would be used against citizens. She's saying if you have a standing military, the executive power, the president's going to likely use that military overseas to enforce treaties, which he came to with the aid and compliance of the Senate, which certainly has happened without a declaration of war many times. Can you tell me the first time? That would be Thomas Jefferson. All right, we'll get to that. Notwithstanding the desultory promise to guarantee a Republican form of government to every state in the Union, if the most discerning eye could discover any meaning at all to the engagement, there are no resources left for the support of internal government or the liquidation of the debts of the state. Every source of revenue is in the monopoly of Congress, and if the several legislatures in their enfeebled state should again, against their own feelings, be necessitated to attempt a dry tax for the payment of their debts and the support of internal police, even this may be required for the purposes of the general government. So she says there's too much taxation power in the hands of the national government. 8, as the new Congress is empowered to determine their own salaries, the requisitions for this purpose may not be very moderate, and the drain for public monies will probably be past all circulation. So this business about Congress being able to determine their own salaries is a big deal. And you'll see when they finally address this, they also say, this can't go into effect while you're still in office. You have to wait for the next election. So if you increase your salaries, you may not be there to get the increase. And this is always a problem, you know, the old thing about the people being able to vote themselves public money. All right. There is no provision for rotation, nor anything to prevent the perpetuity of office in the same hands for life, which by a little well-trained bribery will probably be done to the exclusion of men of the best abilities from their share in the offices of the government. By this neglect, we lose the advantages of the check to the overbearing insolence of office, which by rendering him ineligible at certain periods keeps the mind of man in equilibrium and teaches him the feelings of the governed and better qualifies him to govern in his term. This was addressed in the Constitution. The inhabitants of the United States are liable to be dragged from vicinity of their own country or state to answer the litigious or unjust suit of an adversary on the most distant borders of the continent. In short, the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Federal Court includes an unwarrantable stretch of power over liberty, life, and property of the subject through the wide continent of America, which again is addressed in the Bill of Rights. One representative to 30,000 inhabitants is a very inadequate representation, and every man who has not lost all sense of freedom to his country must, this is number 11, must reprobate the idea of Congress altering by law or on any presence whatsoever, interfering with any regulations for time, places, and manner of choosing our own representatives. I agree, we need more representatives, even today. If the sovereignty of America is designed to be elective, the circumscribing of the votes to only 10 electors in this state and the same proportion in all others is nearly tantamount to the exclusion of the voice of the people and the choice of their first magistrate. It is vesting the choice solely in an aristocratic junta who may easily combine in each state to place the head of the union, the most convenient instrument for a despotic way. Well, this was solved with the Electoral College. A Senate chosen for 6 years will, in most instances, be appointment for life. True. We've now seen that, right? Very hard to get rid of these senators. I mean, look at Mitch McConnell, or as I call him, Yertle. This guy's been in the Senate for 8 billion years. He was there since there were pterodactyls on the earth. I mean, people like that need to go. I think you should have, I would favor an amendment that would limit people to a series of terms in the House of no more than 3 terms, a series of terms in the Senate to no more than 2 terms, combined set of terms of 18 years, and then you're out, except if you get elected president. And we already have a law, one of the amendments restricts how many times you can be reelected president. So I'm in favor of both specific limits on House and Senate members in re-elections and in total number of years you can serve, because we have way too many people who get way too comfortable up there in Washington. Let's see. As the influence of such a body over the minds and people will be co-equal to the extensive powers with which they are vested, and they will not only forget but be forgotten by their constituents, a branch of the Supreme Legislature thus set beyond all responsibility is totally repugnant to every principle of a free government. 14, there is no provision by a Bill of Rights to guard against dangerous encroachments of power in too many instances to be named, but I cannot pass over the silence, the insecurity in which we are left with regard to warrants unsupported by evidence. To subject ourselves to the insolence of any petty revenue officer to enter our houses, search, insult, or seize at pleasure. The rights of the individuals ought to be the primary object of all government and cannot be too securely guarded by the most explicit declarations of their favor. Just saw where the other day, the IRS announced they're going to stop the no-knock raids. And you know why they're doing that? Not because they care about us. They're starting to get antsy that there might be violence if people keep coming into your house without a warrant. 15, difficulty, if not impracticability, of exercising equal and equitable powers of government by a single legislature over an extent of territory that reaches from the Mississippi to the Western Lakes and from them to the Atlantic Ocean is insuperable objection to the adoption of the new system. I disagree. We've handled it pretty well. 16, it is an undisputed fact that not one legislature in the United States had the most distant idea when they first appointed members for a convention, entirely commercial, or when they afterwards authorized them to consider on some amendments of the federal union that they would, without any warrant from their constituents, presume on so bold and daring a stride as ultimately to destroy the state governments and offer a consolidated system. Absolutely. That's what I've been saying about the con-cons. Mercy Otis Warren says it right here. Nobody gave them the authority to do what they did. Now, did it turn out all right? I think so. But they didn't have the authority to do that. And remember, their first act, when they got to Philadelphia, was to meet in secret. So don't ever think that a con is going to yield any different results. You will not be able to control who you send to a con. I don't care how many pieces of paper you have. They will rig it so that people like Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, Bill Kristol, those are going to be the people that go to the con. And your Second Amendment's going to go as soon as they get there. The first appearance of the article, which declares the ratification of 9 states sufficient for the establishment of the new system, where at the face of dissension is a subversion of the Union of Confederated States, intends to the introduction of anarchy and civil convulsions, may be a means of involving the whole country in blood. Eventually it was, and it was settled. The mode in which this Constitution is recommended to the people to judge without either the advice of Congress or the legislatures to the several states is very reprehensible in an attempt to force it upon them before it could be thoroughly understood, and may leave us in that situation that in the first moments of slavery in the minds of the people agitated by the remembrance of their lost liberties will be like the sea in a tempest that sweeps down every mound of security. In other words, well, we need more time to discuss this. It is needless to enumerate in other instances in which the proposed Constitution appears contradictory to the first principles which ought to govern mankind, and it is equally to inquire into the motives that induced to so bold a step as the annihilation of the independence and sovereignty of the 13 distinct states. We were then told by him, the governor, in all the soft language of insinuation, that no form of government of human construction can be perfect, that we had nothing to fear, that we had no reason to complain, that we only had to acquiesce in their illegal claims and to submit to the requisition of Parliament, and doubtless the lenient hand of government would redress all grievances and remove the oppressions of the people. Yet we soon saw armies of mercenaries encamped in our plains, our commerce ruined, our harbors blockaded, our cities burnt. It may be replied that this was in consequence of an obstinate defense of our privileges. This may be true, but the best informed historian produced an instance when the bodies of men were entrusted with power and proper checks relinquished if they were found destitute of ingenuity sufficient to furnish pretenses to abuse it. In other words, you give people power, they will abuse it. And I think the founders did a really good job, maybe not a perfect job in some cases, but a really good job of addressing her concerns with the Bill of Rights and the subsequent amendments that came afterwards. It is presumed to the great body of people unite in sentiment with the writer of these observations, who most devoutly praise the public credit will rear her declining head, and remunerative justice pervade the land, nor is there a doubt a free government is continued. The time and industry will enable both the public and private debtor to liquidate their arranges in the most equitable manner. They wish to see the Confederated States bound together by the most indissoluble union, but without renouncing their separate sovereignties and independence. Can't do it. Can't have both. In any system, whether it's a marriage, a family, a business, or a government, there must be a leader. There must be somebody who says, here are the two choices, I choose this. And everybody has to fall in line. It has to happen. Now you have as many protections as you need, as you can possibly get, but ultimately, if you're going to have any society at all, somebody's got to be a leader, and everybody's got to fall in line. You can't have 13 different leaders. They wish to see the Confederated States bound together by the most indissoluble union, but without renouncing their separate sovereignties and independence and becoming tributaries to a consolidated fabric of aristocratic tyranny. The great art of governing is to lay aside all prejudices and attachments to particular opinions, classes, or individual characters, to consult the spirit of the people, to give way to it, and in so doing, to give it a turn capable of inspiring those sentiments which may induce them to relish a change, which an alteration of circumstances may hereafter be made necessary. But if, after all, on a dispassionate and fair discussion, the people generally give their voices for a voluntary dereliction of their privileges, let every individual who chooses the active scenes of life strive to support the peace and unanimity of his country. So she says, hey, if all of my fellow Americans want to go along with this, I'm going to do my best to make it work. And that's a great attitude. But you got to make sure that everybody is really going along with it. I mean, that's the trick. And while the statesman is plotting for power and the courtier practicing the arts of dissimulation without check, while the rapacious are growing rich by oppression and fortune throwing her gifts to the lap of fools, let the sublimer characters of philosophic lovers of freedom who have wept over her exit retire to the calm shades of contemplation. There they may look down with pity on the inconsistency of human nature and the revolution of states, the rise of kingdoms, and the fall of empires. But if I don't get my way, I'm just going to go sit in contemplation and laugh at how horrible things are for the rest of you. So I always say this when somebody talks about the incumbent, unelected, I think, that's my opinion, person in the White House. When people say, well, we deserve what we get. I don't deserve that. Maybe his voters, all 10 of them do, but I don't deserve that. So anyway, she makes really good points, right? And most of her objections are, in fact, incorporated into the Bill of Rights in one way or another. And later on, courts have both constricted some of those rights and expanded other of those rights, sometimes good, sometimes bad. We're people, we're humans, we're not going to be perfect all the time. But it's a good reading, and it's a good thing for you to read when you think about the Bill of Rights and how this criticism was written by a woman. All right, that'll do it for today. We'll be back to the text next time. I'll see you back here on Friday.